I'm Adele Elise Williams, and this wager is it's my debut collection. It was a book I wrote. It is a book I wrote during my master's at Virginia Tech. And well, I mean, there's poems before that. The majority of them were written as my thesis project, really. And then there were some poems that came after while I started my doctoral program at the University of Houston. But it's really primarily, I was in going to my master's. I had been in restaurants. That's a whole, another narrative, but I had this whole other life. And so when I got there and I had time and was essentially being paid to write and read, I just wrote. I mean, I don't write like that now. I wrote more than I ever have and probably ever will. So I generated a shit ton of material and this, cobbled this book together. And it's, it's a book of first books, not always this way, but I feel like often they're a kind of a purging or like a let me just, often they're autobiographical, and they focus on the self, the body, trauma, whatever those experiences are, kind of leading up to where the writer is now. And then I feel like subsequent collections become uh, less self-centered. Maybe that's not the way to describe it, but expand, kind of zoom out. Anyway, all to say, I up until that point in my writing life, I had been working in labor jobs and service industry jobs, and a low income woman traveling, very itinerant. Had dropped out of college, had just thiety, and then making poor choices, but also really enjoying myself. And so I have this whole kind of history with addiction and recovery. So that's in the book, and I feel like the tensions of the book are who I was for the majority of my adult life up against arriving to academia and being treated and expected to be a scholar, which felt like the exact opposite of who I was, which was kind of a criminal, yeah, in many ways. Um, so that's the work Wager's looking at, and I'm always questioning and interrogating the expectations of me as a woman from the South in my work. But I feel like something that's in that book that's not good. I don't see myself writing about as explicitly as addiction and recovery. I feel like I did the nail on that, and I'm good on talking and thinking about it. But it is an important feature of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely, like, really love the way that you treat addiction and recovery in the book. I feel like I mean, I know that there are poems about everything, but I feel like there aren't I was trying to figure out exactly how to word this. Like, there's, the thing in poetry when you write about, like, gritty things where it's like the sacred and profane, right, are
Hmm.
kind of, like, colliding. Um, but there's something that's a little bit, I guess, in conflict with what I think a lot of people might expect from a poem about addiction and or recovery, just because it's different from what we see on TV. Like, what's in
Hmm.
your book is a little bit more real. So I like that a lot.
Well, thanks. I, I I feel like addiction is, and I actually have another book length project with poet Henry Goldcamp. It's a collaborative poetry manuscript where we think about this a lot. But the addiction as I encounter it in poetry is so stock to me. It is so like I was fucked and now I'm better, uh, or I was fucked and now I'm still a little bit fucked, but I'm definitely much better. And that's not I just had a very different experience. I don't there's much of that life I don't miss, but drug use was really critical to my art making process for a long time. And I'd say between like meditation or microdosing or whatever it is that I'm doing, it's still central to my creative process. So I don't know. It's kind of a thorny subject, but I just don't feel like people talk about it as in such a way that I always can relate to, at least in popular, as it's been popularized in contemporary poetry.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like there's definitely like a sort of more like savior thing that often happens in, especially in poetry. In my experience, I mean, I could be missing like a whole canon of things,
Sure,
I'm sure.
same. Same, same.
Um, but yeah, I really like, it's interesting because I was just watching some show and it was just like a side thing, but I was thinking about this a lot because there was a woman who was in recovery, like, and Jessica Biel's character came in and like they talked about microdosing mushrooms. And she's like, yeah, it's okay because it's like I'm microdosing mushrooms. And it was just like a side thing. And I was like, oh, that's so real. Like so many people I know who have gone through like a great deal of, rehabs or, AA or whatever recovery type experiences they've done are still doing entheogens or, you know, trying to expand their thinking or separate or go deeper, however they phrase it. And it does seem
100%.
very common, but not talked about.
Yeah, I mean, girl, I'm an addict forever, and I'm that will manifest in, materialize in many different ways, and many of those will not be categorized as substances that are abused, I'm sure, but some of them will. It's just not clean. There's so much, but right, like that's the tragedy of critical conversation, um, in general, is lack of like attention to gray area and nuance.
Mhm.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I try to play with that in the book, and continue, right, like to challenge these clean categorizations we do.
Do you want to speak to the settings in the book? I feel like, in a lot of poems, there are really like your book is one of those things where it's like I could write a lot of lines that I really like down. So I just at some point it was like, I'm just gonna stop because I like pretty much all of the lines. But there's a lot of like, descriptions of rot and, the way that the Gulf like comes in and kind of dissolves things. And um I think that there's a lot of history and Southern settings and writing being kind of closely related to rot. I wonder if you wanted to talk about that or anything around that.
Yeah, when I read from the book, almost, inevitably, really, it seems, after I'm done, someone will ask me, like, "Where are you from?" And where, because there's many places in the book, and they obviously have like Southern kind of gothic or grit lit undertones. So I know I they get conflated, they collapse, and that's intentional. But and it's also just the consequence of living so many places, and for such short amounts of time. I mean, I really was really itinerant for a long time. So I think that uh, there's just, of course, being from the deep south, there's distinction, right, between Birmingham and New Orleans and Houston and Destin or somewhere. And but in a way, there's a there's like a saturation of the life, like there's a stain of the life down there that to me is kind of a general veil of Southern living. When we moved to North Carolina, my family, when I was young, from Baton Rouge, and people still like, we're in, say we're in the South. My husband's from Virginia, and he's like, Virginia's the South, North Carolina's the South. He moved with me to Houston, and he was like, oh, this is the deep South. And I was like, dude, it's, North Carolina ain't no South. I mean, it's South, but it's not the South. And so there's something about the Gulf. There's something about being up against the Gulf that I think is really uh, unique to that space and really difficult. I think living in the Gulf South is really difficult. And so that feels like an encapsulation of much of the lived experiences in the book, even when I'm not in the Gulf South. It's something I carried with me into Virginia, where, I was in Southwest Virginia for many years writing this book. These poems take place in Wyoming and Montana, places that aren't the South at all. Uh, so I think it's like inevitable. Like I can't not take that kind of vibe with me, and a part of that vibe is definitely rot. Is definitely being like acutely aware of difficulty and darkness and decay and wetness. There's something so oppressively moist about the deep south, literally and figuratively. And it feels like it's so ingrained in who I am that it's a tone. I think I map onto wherever else I am.
That resonates so much with me, and it's nice to hear it because I just don't really talk to very many people or know very many people who are trying to represent that in writing. And I think that it's interesting. I'm a speech language pathologist, and I went to school in Portland. And somebody came up to me, one of my fellow students, and he was like, "Are you from the Gulf Coast?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, you have a Gulf Coast accent." And I was like, "That is not a like." Like, but he was like, "No, no, no," and he, like, showed me all these clips, and apparently there's, like, linguists categorizing that, and there are some things that I'm not even aware of because I worked really hard to not have an accent.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and I was just like, it is its own place. It's and, like, in each part of the Gulf South, there's, like, that influence, like, people who are, living in Mississippi are having a really different experience than people who are living in Florida in a lot of ways, but you're right, there's something that's hard to define about that, and I appreciated reading it because I'm just like, the wetness and the rot, and then, like, this sort of relentlessness to the lifestyle, I feel like comes through in your poetry too, where
Mm.
it's like, when you're talking about like being itinerant and doing a lot of, these like labor service positions, I also did that for a long time. And I feel like most people there are doing that. Like,
Mhm.
whereas in Seattle here, they're doing that, but they're making $40 an hour. So it's a little
Yeah.
different than
Yeah.
four or
Yeah.
$2 an hour.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's something about class in the South as well, that's much more slippery to me than it is in other places I've lived. Uh, even the folks I knew that are or I didn't know growing up, but now, for example, I was in Houston most recently, and there's many wealthy folks in Houston, and even then, you take a street. Of course, Houston has no zoning, but this was my neighborhood in Baton Rouge, right? We had professors, we had somebody mentally ill down the street who killed his wife. We had artists. I mean, it was just, and this is not maybe not even a. It's like a city block, maybe my little street, and so there was something that I just feel like that a lot of designations collapse in the South. There's something, and I'm not articulating it well because I do think it's difficult. And another space that is represented in the book, of course, being in Southwest Virginia, but I spent much time in Appalachia and Western North Carolina, where I started my undergrad and dropped out and just manufactured and sold drugs, and it was really lucrative. And I grieve sometimes for my low work, high income lifestyle. Um, but Appalachia has there. I got there and I was like, holy shit, this is that same feeling of everybody's in it together because of the environment.
Yeah, yeah, that's super real. I think you're right. It like brings you so close all the time. And I think about for me, like it was the hurricanes that made that happen because of having to share food and stuff after a storm or help each other rebuild and stuff. Because in Pensacola, they get hit like every year by
Oh yeah.
something. And but I lament that all the things you're talking about too. Sometimes, because like it's so different in other places and people it's not represented on TV. It's always a joke on TV or
Hmm.
like some like Dexter type thing. It's like of
Yeah.
course a show about a serial killer is going to be in fucking in the South.
Yeah. 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 It is. It's like either really eh, stereotyped, I guess, but even more so, it's just sensationalized, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And there's a lot in your book too about your mother. And like I think my favorite part is like I'm going to say the line wrong because I stopped writing things down because I was like, I love everything. But it's like somebody asked you, to list the 5 things that you take from your home, and they were all mom. I wonder, like, and I noticed that the mom character kind of pops up a lot in the book. I wondered if you wanted to speak to how and why that happened.
Yeah, it's funny. So I submitted this right to my thesis director, Bob Hickok, who told me, he read the book and he got back to me and he was like, this is like a love letter to your mother. This is a book about your mother and flowers. That was like the first thing he said to me. And I was like, okay, I know I have an unhealthy like tether to my mom, but I didn't even see. I was like, there's a flower in the book. He's like, there's flowers all over the book. But that's, the beauty of having someone you trust spend time with your work. But my there's just no other way to say it. I mean, I don't there is my mother has saved me, and she saved me so many times, and I just want people to know I do have a father, and he's incredible. Like, I have an awesome dad who was always there, but my family is very matriarchal, and the women are just like powerhouse women for better or for worse, and the men or partners we take, the husbands we have and the partners we have in my family are trailing behind, like, holding our trains in many ways. They're amazing men, but they are men who kind of let us go wild. There's a lot of mental illness and addiction on my mother's side of the family, and so it just makes for really strong personalities. So I grew up around women who were really interesting, who were, creative and intellectual and also completely not. I mean, just really this kind of diverse qualities of these women. And my mother, another thing that contributes to this is I was talking to my mom about this recently, a really scared child. Like I, I was diagnosed with all my things young, probably like 10. And I was just a really fearful kid. I was super anxious and I was super scared. And I'd go do so. I mean, I just remember every time I'd go somewhere to friends or, anything, I'd call my mom to come get me. I was scared to sleep. I was scared of the dark. I was just like this really scared kid. And so for whatever reason, I grew up in a safe, loving home. But for whatever reason, so I think those things drove me right, like into my parents' arms. And my parents have just saved me over and over. And luckily, I don't think they have to anymore, that they've done all their saving. But my mom, she's my queen, man. And I don't know how to understand almost anything without some degree of her in it. Um, the poet, she's a newer friend for me, Virginia Conchin. I'm not sure if I'm saying her last name correctly, but we she writes about her mother and her parents in the same way. There's some of us that just like need to like just never left the womb. And I don't know what that shit is, but that's where I'm at. Just like,
I love that. It's, like, so the complete opposite of my experience. It's, like, so fascinating to me. I'm like, "Oh, that's so cool." And it's also, like, I'm a mom, so I'm like, hopefully my kids have that experience
well,
in
that's
some way, in some way.
most people are like, you love your mom. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
dude, I'd be
it's
loving my
great.
mom.
That's awesome. No, and did you, I mean, this is, like, such a cliche question, I'm almost sorry to ask it, but, like, did she read your poems before you published the book?
Oh yeah. We're just up each other's asses, bro. It's too much. So she's seen them all before they went. She's always, can't you just change shit to, crap? Or like, she's always trying to help me with my profanity, which she's always done. I've been foul mouthed my whole life. So, but she's a good sport, I don't know. I'm not a mother, and I don't know how you are that, like, fair, my parents, they're just like really level. I don't know. I don't know how that happened. I grew up like as a woman in kitchens, and I was more often not, the only chick in the kitchen. So I grew up around dudes, And I have a pretty masculine, like, there's many elements of my gender performance that are quite masculine. And that's just all taught from them. Being crude, of course, being vulgar, being aggressive, being quick and funny and self deprecating, being judgmental and like hilarious, hysterically hateful. That's a terrible term, but yeah, like it was just this everybody. I mean, that's a part of the vetting of a kitchen is if you can't hang, you can't hang. And so I learned to talk, right? And to hold my own. And I just like became just wanted to, hang with the best of them. And so that's, I'm sure, like a critical reason. It's also self-preserving, right? Traveling alone as a woman, um, needing to just like be a fucking boss and handle my shit and talk like it's acting a certain way to portray a certain thing. So all those things contributed to it. But I also grew up in a family that, you know, cusses and drank, did daiquiri drive-throughs and talked like sailors. And I mean, just shit you do in the South. And when I started writing, or when I got to school and, I'm learning poetics and I'm just like, I can't not, I'm this isn't entirely true. I can write a high lyric, really clean, yeah, poem like that just presents very refined and curated, but I'm just not interested in doing it, and because I don't really like reading them. So I think I write like I speak, and I like reading other poems where people are just talking like they talk. That's just how I talk. If I didn't cuss in my poems, I think it would be bizarre for anybody who really knows me.
That's how I feel too. Like I did a reading and I didn't realize until I read it out loud that like this 5-minute reading had like the word fuck in it like 7
Yeah.
and and one like because there's one like line of dialogue where my mom is like fuck 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 you know? And I was just like this probably offends people or something. I don't know. It's a lot of fun.
But like also why?
Right? Yeah.
Like
What
also
is it?
why, dude?
Yeah.
Like grow up. I feel I'm like grow up, man. I've always been fascinated. I mean, it's the power of language. Like on a more intellectual level, it's the power. It's like money, right? It's fake. I mean, it means nothing. But we make it mean whatever we want it to mean. And I think it's, I mean, kind of like laughable. Why it's fuck. Like it's a word, dude. I was reading something. I just finished teaching a summer session poetry class, and I was reading something, and maybe an anthology or a craft book, a recent one, and it talked about like how there's, how profanity's lazy, and but I think that, if you're going to say that, then you're going to say idiom's lazy and you're going to say the vernacular and colloquial's lazy. And that's tacky, man. And it's also bullshit. Like it's not, it's cultural, it's community, it's time and space and place, it's class. So I don't know. But and that wasn't the only text where I encountered that or workshop where I've encountered that. But I'm just not interested in making any art that isn't of myself. That like I mean I perform. I think we all do. I think the poem is a performance, but for me it's like a hyper performance of who I am and what I do. I'm not going to clean myself up for a poem. I'll clean myself up for much.
In this book, resilience is just actually just waking up and like being a person, which I think is what I think about resilience is that you just like it just it just means being there and doing it and
Yeah,
continuing. It doesn't
yeah,
mean
totally.
succeeding. It doesn't mean processing it well. It just means continuing and like trying.
Yeah, for me, for sure. I'm just like trying to be a good person for myself and the the people in my orbit. Um, which is something, to be honest, like I learned in 12 steps, right? Like it's just enough to get up and make some coffee and like do the dishes. That's plenty, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Is there anything that I haven't covered about your book? Anything you wanna talk about, like, or the press maybe, or any like, what's happened since it's come out, like, how that's gone?
Um, I think I don't know. I mean, one thing I will say is it was I publishing. I was talking with Anthony Thomas Lombardi, interviewing him about his first book, Murmurations, that just came out from Yes Yes. And we were talking about like the gravity of the first book, like how hard you work for it. And I mean, I remember Patricia Smith calling me on my fucking phone. It was nuts. I grew up like this is people win. A reality is people win contests by poets they don't know, right? I submit to contests by poets I'm not really familiar with, but I have a Southern Press named after a poet I love, you know, whose daughter I love, and then Patricia as the editor. I mean, everything. It was just like a fucking dream, man. And she called, and it was so rad, and it still is so rad, and it's still one of the best things, maybe the best thing I've ever done in my life. But it is just one of a lot of poetry books that come out. You know, like I'm kind of in this like sounds so whiny, but I'm in that space where I'm just like, damn, I guess my book just is out. That's you know, I was just out, kind of not really there. You know, it's like it is and it isn't. I don't know. Um, I'm competitive. You know, I want it to like be some big ass thing for everyone, but it's a big ass thing for me, and that's perfectly good. Um, and it's cool that like people have interest in talking about it, and so I think one thing I think about and I didn't know that I know now is right, like the kind of lull after it comes out and it I don't know, it's almost like this bittersweet, right? Like it's so it's when you do something really extraordinary for yourself, but like nobody, you're like, doesn't I don't know if anybody really cares, you know? But it is enough that it was for me. And I do know it matters more than that. But um that's like kind of my relationship with it right now. Is like how do I keep it alive? I want to keep it alive. I want people, you know, somebody to put it on their textbook list for a required course or whatever. But it's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it's awesome. Like I have a I have a book that never goes out, like university presses. As long as that university exists, university, I mean, it's never going nowhere. So it's kind of rad.